If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Almitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
Hey there, my equity warriors. I am so glad that we could come together today. Since this is our first gathering, let's get to know each other, shall we? I want you to gather around. Black out the rest of the world, the background noise, all the stuff that's going on around you, how your morning went so far. And if it's safe to do so, I want you to get comfortable. Close your eyes and imagine. Imagine being a preteen, kidnapped, chained, transported in darkness for months in filth and squalor, and sold into slavery in a foreign country where the language that they speak is not one that you know. Imagine being used like cattle to breed other human beings only for them to be held in slavery and bondage. We don't have to imagine. This is the story of my fourth great-grandfather Putu and probably some of your ancestors too. Today, though, there's a different kind of slavery that so many of our children in K-12 education are doomed to be trapped into. And I'm going to tell you about that in just a little bit. But now imagine living in the country and farming on the land you live on, but do not and cannot own. Forever falling deeper and deeper into debt no matter how hard you work because of a system that is designed to keep you oppressed, never having opportunity to escape or to elevate yourself. You see, that's the story of my great-grandparents and grandparents, and probably some of yours as well. But today there's a different kind of systemic oppression that our children in K-12 education are locked into. And I'm going to tell you about that in just a little bit as well. Imagine with me one more time. Imagine a happy 7-year-old, a daddy's girl, born in California in the turbulence of the 60s, and having her world shattered when she sees her father shot to death. I don't have to imagine that because that's my story. And it may be the story of some of you. It's a story that is similar to some of those that were shared with me by my own students when I was a classroom teacher. It's the story of many of our students who come to our schools every single day. And what happens to children in our schools, that one common experience that most children in our country share, what happens to them can make the difference between a life of low-paying jobs, incarceration, poor health, and early death, or living the life that many of you and I have been blessed to live. You see, every single day, many of us wake up in what so much of the world would consider the lap of luxury, only because, at least for me, I know it's true for me, that I have had a path paved for me by ancestors and mentors and teachers who struggled and fought to give me and many of you a better life. I shouldn't be here today. I shouldn't have this microphone today, but I am. And it's just part of the reason why I am so passionate about the work that I've done for the last 30 years, the work that I continue to do, and it's why I need warriors like you to join me. The slavery of today is not one that is so visible to the naked eye. We don't necessarily see people in physical chains of bondage. But you see, we've created a system of education where our children of color, children of cultural diversity, children of linguistic diversity, children of low wealth, children whose parents were not properly educated when they were in our school systems are stuck in a loop without our help. Let's look at this from a couple of different lenses. I want you to see them. I want you to see the children, those most marginalized who show up for school every day and work hard, and some of those who cannot show up for school every day because of their home life. See them. The most basic foundational skill, the one thing that every single child can do is learn to read, write, and think on time and on grade level. We know how to do it. We know the science of teaching reading, but 2/3 of our fourth graders and 2/3 of our eighth graders lack proficiency in reading. And that comes from the National Center of Educational Statistics. We are creating children who are functionally illiterate. 2/3 of them. When we disaggregate that data, more than half of our Black fourth graders and almost half of our Latino fourth graders are below basic in reading level. Below basic, not basic, and not proficient, which is actually where every child should be. Proficient, 2 levels below. And there's a cost to that impacts everyone. Every one of you that's listening to this podcast, and everyone that you know, and everyone who has not listened to it. Everyone. Because low levels of literacy cost the United States $225 billion in workforce productivity loss every single year, in crime, in unemployment-related loss of tax revenue. Lord knows the government wants its tax revenue, but we're not teaching our children how to read, not because we can't, but because there is a system that is designed, because of its outcome. We know that it is the design of the system to create children who become adults who are illiterate. Think about the last time you went to, the bank, a fast food restaurant, the grocery store, and the person who was there as an employee, who is there to help you with what it is that you've gone in for. If you're an educator, many times you can hear this. You can hear the low level of literacy. Think about it. Where else have you seen it? Because this is about all of us and the lives that we live and the people that we will come into contact with. But forget about reading for a second. What about special education? If you're an educator, I want you to think for just a minute. What percentage of students in your school are referred for special education services? Whether it's an IEP, let's say some form of 504, or Tier 2, Tier 3 intervention, okay? And Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention aren't counted in these numbers, nor are 504s. But think about how many children either are designated and receiving interventions in special education or need to because they are not proficient in reading or mathematics. If we just look at those with IEPs, it's about 15% of the students in K-12 public education. 15%. But when we look at the rate of developmental disabilities, true cognitive impairment, it's only 7% of children. Some estimates are as low as 2.5%, but we're referring at 2 to 7 times the rate of true impairment. And that's overall. Again, if we break those numbers down and we look at referrals and students receiving services or designated to receive services by race, Black learners, Pacific Islanders, and our Indigenous learners are up to 16 times more likely to be identified for special education services compared to their white peers. If you're in a school that is racially diverse, I want you to visualize your entire student population. And then if you're not a special educator, take a trip to the special education classroom. Take a trip to the intervention classroom. What do those children look like? I know in my years of consulting, and in that time worked in 44 states and over 700 school systems, When I went into special education classrooms, I was almost always guaranteed to see a disproportionate number of Black boys, and depending on where I was, Latino boys, disproportionate to the percentage of students that were white. Why is that? It's about a choice. It's about a choice we make as to what we use to instruct. It's about a choice we make as to how we provide instruction. But I'll come back to that because there are things that you can do, and I'm going to tell you what you can do. Let's talk about discipline. Suspensions, expulsions. Suspensions and expulsions are tracked. Those we can count. Referrals to the office, not so much. So for that, we've got to use some anecdotal evidence. But let's talk about the hard numbers. We know that Black, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous students, wait a minute, didn't I just call them out before? Yes, I did. For special education and for foundational reading, reading levels. Black, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous students are 2 to 3 times more likely to be suspended out of school, expelled, referred to law enforcement, or arrested at school. And that number comes from the National Center for Education Statistics. 2 to 3 times more likely than their white peers for the same offenses. Why? Why? We know that 80% of elementary educators are white women. And this is not to condemn all white women or to condemn any race of people. It's just a fact. You see, the systems and the implicit bias that's built into us that fuels and feeds off this system, that's the part that we've got to first work at changing. And we can do that. We can do that. We just have to examine ourselves. We have to examine what we think, what we believe. But I want to close the loop. I'm going to go back to reading, right? 2/3 of our 4th graders, 2/3 of our 8th graders are not proficient in reading, creating, because of the way we teach, the tools we use to teach, the methods we use to teach, creating children who are illiterate. When we look at children who are in the juvenile court system, 85% of them are functionally illiterate. Do you see the connection there? If we don't teach them how to read, as I said, that other form of slavery, condemning them, dooming them to a life that will lead them much more likely to negative encounters with law enforcement, has a lot to do with literacy. Now, someone's going to say, we don't have the money. Well, let's talk about where we spend our money. The average per pupil expenditure in the 2021-22 school year, so last school year, averaged out over all K-12 public schools was $14,575 per ADA, per average daily attendance. That's $80.94. Now, I always say I'm not a math person. I love round numbers. So let's round it up. Let's be extremely generous and say we spend $100 a day per instructional day per child. Okay? How's that one work for you? Nice round numbers. The average cost to keep a young person, a juvenile, in secure confinement is $588 per day. So let's round that one, not as generously, but let's say that's $600 per day. We can educate for 80 or incarcerate for 600. That's more than 7 times the cost per day to keep them locked up, as opposed to teaching them how to read, write, think, and calculate. I don't have to be a mathematician to know that there's something very wrong with that picture. And it doesn't have to be this way. We know better. If I horribly paraphrase Maya Angelou, if we know better, we should do better. And this is why I have spent 30 years, the last 31 years of my life, working to create better educational systems for our children. And I can't do it alone. At some point in time, I really would like to retire. That means I need more people like me doing what I love to do to help facilitate this change. We have to change mindsets. We have to change the way we think about public education. We have to change the way we think about the children who come to us in public schools. And some of us don't even realize what our thoughts are. We have to eliminate systems that oppress children. We have to create classrooms and schools with a culture that is focused on equity. And let me define equity so nobody gets it twisted. Equity is simply freedom. It's freedom from bias against any group of learners and freedom from favoritism for any group of learners. Freedom from bias against or favoritism for. Equity is a form of emancipation. An emancipation that frees teachers to teach using science and using ethics. One more time. Close your eyes if you can, if it's safe to do so. And I want you to see a Venn diagram. On one side of the Venn diagram, the big circle says the science of, and pick, if you're a subject matter teacher, put your subject in there. If it's reading, math, social studies, science, technology, whatever it is. What is the science around teaching that content? On the other side of the Venn diagram, I want you to put the words, what is ethically right for the children I serve. Not all children, the children in your school, because that's your span of control. That's the piece of the world that you can control. In the overlap between the science of and what is ethically right, that, my friends, that, my warriors, is where we have to focus, because that is how we create classrooms focused on equity. That freedom from bias against or favoritism for. That is how we can begin to choose and use curriculum that is culturally appropriate, curriculum where students can see themselves. I want to talk to you at some point in time about the 4 equity indicators, which are meritocracy, standards, impartiality, and asset allocation. But for this one piece, it's about impartiality, about students being able to see themselves in the curriculum, to see their stories in the history, to see people who look like them in the sciences. It's having an unabridged, unwhitewashed history of the world, one that is not Eurocentric or white America centric, but the entirety of history. It is literature that reflects the diverse cultures and stories of people of this country and of the world, because we are just a little tiny piece of the world. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a parent, a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, a board member, board trustee, a consultant, an author, a sales rep who is bringing curriculum to schools. Every single one of us, there's something that we can do. We can start by examining our own systems through that lens of equity, through a lens that makes sure that we are not showing favoritism for any group of people, nor are we being biased against any group of people. Each of us can begin to make change, whether it's in the way we see things, the way we talk, the way we examine information, the way we set up our classrooms, what's on our walls. If you're a principal, what is the culture of your school, the culture of your department, your PTA, the curriculum that you're working for or selling on behalf of an educational publisher? And you can join me every week. Send your questions, topics, and requests to askdrberry.com, and I'll answer those questions and bring you experts to help address those topics. Let's not worry about the things we can't change. Let's change the things we can no longer accept.
That's it for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Dr. Berry herself. Be sure to head over to 3epodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Dr. Berry's gift. Then join us on the next episode.